Hi guys, today we're going to talk about happiness. Happiness as it relates to cultural buildings and happiness as it relates to great buildings. And you can see right here on my map that my population is enthusiastic, and so as a result I'm getting 20% additional productivity from that happiness. So not only will I get the productivity as shown here for coins and supplies, but if I was to go beat up my neighbor or go and unlock some map space, I would get some bonus points, assuming I won, uh, the battle. So I would get, at the end of the battle when they show you not so much the reward, right? Maybe you get 1,000 gold for unlocking a map tile or something, but not that. You're not. It's not going to influence that. It's going to be the points that you get for winning the battle. So bear that in mind. If you're going to go beat up your neighbor, make sure that your population is happy. If you're going to go to war, make sure your people are happy. Uh, so that's how population impacts you directly. Some things to think about. So now we're going to talk a little strategy. Whenever we can, we should be getting our happiness from great buildings. For one, great buildings can't be motivated. So that's a benefit. We don't want people motivating our buildings that provide happiness. I mean, if they could motivate our great buildings, that would be great. But because they can't, uh, that's all the more reason for you to pour your happiness into a great building. The other reason to have your happiness in great buildings is because great buildings outperform cultural buildings, right? Even the Colosseum, and I'm going to actually go into each of these great buildings at some point, but even the Colosseum outperforms all but a couple uh, cultural buildings. The the other benefit to your great buildings is that because they're so big, you usually only have one road tile touching it. So the Colosseum here, you can see there's only one road tile touching it. And the Hagia, there's only one road tile touching it. And in both cases, they're sharing that road tile with two other buildings. So that increases the efficiency of those buildings greatly. If instead of say, uh, these watchfires, instead of having those, I had a road, then I've decreased the productivity of this Colosseum by a great deal. By a great deal. So, usually, when you organize your cities, you're going to have your great buildings touching only one road tile. So, that's another benefit to great buildings. They are usually, when you factor in roads, much more efficient than their cultural building counterparts. And I'm going to show you the impact of these cartographers. So these cartographers are actually not here for the purposes of this video. I needed them. Um, and you can see one of them's even been motivated. So there's nothing that drives me more insane than seeing my cultural buildings get motivated, especially when I'm screaming alchemists. But neither here nor there. In general, you want to get as much as you can out of your great buildings. Second to great buildings, you want to get as much as you can, happiness that is, out of your roads. Okay? Because here again, they can't be motivated. I don't want these motivated, right? If they allowed roads to be motivated, fantastic. But they don't, and that's very beneficial to you. Why? Because instead of motivating my cartographer, I would rather them go and motivate my alchemist. Would I rather have 320 more happiness, or would I rather have 2,000 more supplies? Well, guess what? I'd rather have 2,000 more supplies. So, the fact that a road can't be motivated, the fact that a great building can't be motivated, these are benefits to you. They're going to increase your productivity even further. So, you'll also notice that I don't have any one by one productions. I do have the watchfires. They can't be motivated. I use them as end caps on a road. I used to use one by ones as end caps, but people were motivating them. And even though they were pretty They were pretty good because I didn't know what I was buying when I started in this game, and I brought a couple. I had a couple Bronze Age, pillars that were giving some good happiness. The fact is, people were motivating them, and I didn't. I don't want them to motivate them. I want them to motivate my production buildings. So I removed them, and I've replaced all my end caps with watchfires. If you can do that, great. If you don't have any watchfires, totally understand. I would probably, if I didn't have the watchfires, I would just put a road tile there because I don't want people motivating them. So hopefully I've driven that point home. We want great buildings uh, because they can't be motivated, and they outperform their cultural building counterparts usually. We also want roads. We want to update our roads as much as possible because again they can't be upgrade or they can't be motivated, and we get a lot of happiness from them. And roads have the beneficial impact of increasing your rating. So that's another thing to bear in mind is roads do impact your rating. Uh, okay, so strategically, I think we get it, right? Great buildings are better than cultural buildings. Roads are important. Uh, we don't generally want our cultural buildings to be motivated, so the fewer of them we have, the better. All right. And then, of course, the impact of roads. You're going to see that here, but just using my cartographer, just remember as we get into the spreadsheet here, I've got two road tiles touching the cartographer that I'm sharing with uh, an estate house across the street. Whereas my great buildings are sharing one road tile with two other buildings adjacent. Okay, so what I've done is I've put together this spreadsheet. The spreadsheet, you can download it, play with it, tweak it. Uh, you know, if you improve it, send it back. I'd love to see what you guys do. What I've done is I've got the cultural buildings here in white, and then beneath that I've got all of the great buildings by epoch. Okay, and what I've done is I've factored into it the cost, so gold and supplies. That's pretty straightforward. For the great buildings, instead of gold and supplies, what I did is I put how many, uh, you know, so if for example the Colosseum requires 300 Iron Age components to build it, so you can think, limestone, jewelry, that sort of stuff, right? How many of it did it require? And then how much does it cost to produce that? And then, what's the overall cost, right? So to produce a Colosseum in terms of golden supplies, it comes out to 24,000 golden supplies combined, right? So 12,000 of each. In the case of the cultural buildings, they only cost golden supplies, right? And so their calculation is a little more straightforward. The great buildings get a little weird down here because as you get in the modern era, you require previous era materials to make your materials, so that the math looks a little weird, but know that, so for example, to produce an Etonium, it's going to cost you 3.3 million supplies. Contrast that with, the Colosseum, it's going to cost you 24,000. I mean, think about that. 24,000 to produce a Colosseum, you know, 3.3 million to produce an Etonium. So food for thought, what's the value, right? I mean, that's probably what's immediately coming into your head. What's going to be a better value? And I'm going to show you that here in a second. So anyway, cost. That we've factored that in. The cost per cell, I really don't like this. I probably would delete this, but I left it here just for you guys to, maybe you can find a use and you could share that with me. The reason why I don't like cost per cell is because bigger buildings, they're generally going to have a cheaper cost per cell. The trade-off is smaller buildings are usually more expensive than bigger buildings because bigger buildings have the penalty of taking up more space. Cost per happiness, well, this is a pretty important one, I think. I do value this column. And so for every point of happiness, how much does it cost in, treasure? The shape, this is always good. So if you're looking for a particular building, you can just sort and say, give me 3x3s. What's the smallest face? What's the largest face? This factors into another calculation. Cells, so 3x3, we get 9, right? 9 total cells. Road, how many road tiles are required? In the case of most of our buildings, only one. But once you get into the progressive and modern era, you start requiring two-lane roads. So we factored that in. Happiness, what's the raw happiness that you get from the building? So, for example, if we took a public bath, 570 happiness. That's seems like a lot, especially when you look at the other buildings around it, right? And then what's the raw happiness per cell? So for how many cells, right? We've got 16 cells for a public bath. If I was to, divide that, by 570 or into 570, I would get 35.63 happiness per cell. So when you look at just raw happiness, you look at the buildings around it, boy, does the public bath look good. But then when you look at the raw happiness per cell, it's pretty good, but it's right in line with, where it ought to be in the tech tree. So, raw happiness per cell is what most people look at. They don't always factor in the cost per happiness. I think that's a mistake. But raw happiness per cell is what most people will look at. What I've done with the blue then is I factored in, the happiness per cell and the road, right? So the road that's touching it. You say, well, why is that important? Well, let's take the Colosseum since it's a good example here. It's a pretty big building, 6 by 7, and by let's go end of road, and let's say absolute minimum. So if we look at the Colosseum, he's at the end of the road, and he's got the absolute minimum face modifier, which is 1. And so we go from 26.19 to 26, right, when we factor in that one road tile. Well, that's not a big drop off. That's pretty darn good. Okay. Now, how many cultural buildings are at the end of a road? Very few. Most people have it set up like my cartographer, right? I had my 2 cartographers there. And so my cartographer, if I did have it at the end of a road, you'd see a much bigger drop off. While it provides my raw HPC of 53, happiness per cell, when you factor in, if it was at the end of the road, it still drops 3 points almost, right? So, its road position is pretty important. But if we actually accounted for where, the actual road that is there, so if it was shared with the guy across the street, and on its smallest face, the cartographer is a 2 by 3 building, so 2 spaces. Now if we look at our cartographer, right, we see that I dropped even further, 53. So I lost almost 8 happiness per cell just because of how it's connected to a road. Okay, so that's important to me. I want to know how much happiness per cell relative to its connection to the road. Okay, so let's take the best case scenario again. Let's go back to end of the road, absolute minimum. And what I want to show you guys now is you might be inclined to do what most people in the game do. And what do? They say, give me the raw happiness per cell, and then sort it largest to smallest, right? And so you can see there's not a whole lot of white up here. I mean, there's some, right? But there's not a whole lot. If you look at just, the ranking of the top 40, we see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 buildings in the top 40 are cultural buildings. And if you look in the top 15, not a single one. Okay? You go all the way to you have to get to the top 17 before you see a regular cultural building. So, and not only that, but that cultural building is from the modern era. So is this one in the 20th space and the 23rd progressive era. So these are all very late cultural buildings. What does that, why is that important? Well, take this Notre Dame. This Notre Dame in 4th place. It only cost 240,000 gold and supplies to build, and at level 10 it outperforms something from the progressive and the modern era, and you got it in the high Middle Ages. Okay, that means you leveled it, you invested in it, It costs you very little in terms of resources. In fact, the drive-in theater costs 3 times as much for you to implement than the Notre Dame. Okay, so the Notre Dame as an investment is better than any of the cultural buildings. And you already know that if I have this drive-in theater on my land, somebody is going to motivate it, and I don't want to motivate it, right? So, and not only that, not only does the Notre Dame outperform the drive-in theater, but the Notre Dame gives me the additional benefit of providing me with supplies. Okay, and is it a lot of supplies? I don't think so. But when you're looking at just happiness, happiness alone, the Notre Dame outperforms these buildings. A lot of people poo-poo the Colosseum, and if you look, it's in 30th place. But how many cultural buildings are above it? You see one, two, three. Okay, so yes, there are 3 cultural buildings above it, and they do outperform it quite nicely. 116, 104. You know, they do outperform the 95.24 Colosseum, but you have to remember that Colosseum is supplying you with metals. You also have to remember, when did you get the Colosseum? And I know I'm kind of going a little bit off topic here. When did you get that Notre Dame? You got them. You probably got your Colosseum. If not in the Iron Age, you probably got it in the early Middle Ages. When did you get that Notre Dame? If you didn't get it in the High Middle Ages, you probably got it in the Late Middle Ages. And so you got the benefit of these buildings over that time as well. So the great buildings provide a much better investment, both in terms of cost and value over their lifetime, than these buildings. When Inna Games comes out with another epoch, what's going to happen next? Are you going to throw away the drive-in theater for the very next thing that comes out? Probably. Will you throw away your Notre Dame? Probably not. So those are things to consider whenever you're messing around with great buildings, when you're deciding to implement a great building. Okay, so I'm going to go back here, and I think you guys get it. Uh, this went a little longer than I had hoped. I think I say that in every video, but if you see something wrong with any of the calculations, by all means feel free to fix it and shoot it to me, and I'll re-upload it. If you see an opportunity to improve this, by all means send it to me, and we'll incorporate those changes. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks.